send a message.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We were just waiting a few minutes.
Good morning.
Yeah. Good morning, Karen. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
No, we were just waiting for Mr. Khalid to show up. But
okay.
I think we're gonna wait just one more minute.
Yeah, everyone.
So we just send a brief schedule to everyone. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Daniele Sabato, Advocacy Assistant at the European Center for Democracy and Human Rights, or ECDHR. And it's an honor for me and my colleague Cindy Zeng to moderate this webinar about the whitewashing strategies used in the region of the Arab Peninsula, focusing especially in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates. Whitewashing is a form of soft power that sways attention away from violations of human rights and international law to legitimize government's leadership. In the Arab Peninsula, these strategies range from hosting cultural and sports events to controlling the online visibility of information and securing economic leverages for political support. As the case of Qatar's FIFA World Cup has brought once again to the fore how the international community can be easily distracted by aesthetic facades and narratives. It's imperative that both civil and political actors are able to recognize and react against these mechanisms.
This is why we hope this event will be only the first of many such occasions. On behalf of ECDHR and our Executive Director, Hussein Abdullah, we want to thank all the participants, including the representative from FIDH and ICF-UAE, for their presence. We also want to extend our special greetings to the members, states, parliamentarians, and their assistants from Luxembourg, Sweden, Iceland, Portugal, Spain, and Finland, who kindly joined us today. Finally, we want to thank our panelists, Mrs. Karen Melchior, Mr. Elias Geoffroy, Mr. Khalid Ibrahim, and Mr. Ali Mushaima. Their interventions will delve into these and other issues, and everyone is invited to raise questions only during the Q&A dedicated session in the last 20 minutes of the event.
So first of all, I'm happy to introduce you to the Danish member of the European Parliament from the political group Renew, Ms. Karen Melchior. She has been recently vocal on the human rights situation in Bahrain, especially the case of the Danish Bahraini human rights defender Abdullah Al-Khawaja, and the export of European technology used to surveil and repress Bahraini people. She will talk about whitewashing in relation to sport and cultural events. So without further ado, I would like to give her the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for hosting this important event. I think we need to maintain focus on the human rights situation in the Gulf countries and in Bahrain in particular in these days where there is a lot of attention on the sports and the cultural events that are ongoing there. Every country has an image, and a lot of the time governments and even cities, they spend a lot of time trying to promote themselves and the things that they're doing. But we need to be aware that the promotion of countries and cities need to actually be the promotion of something that is at the core or at the essence of that country. If not, it becomes hollow, and you cannot promote something effectively that is not true. We have seen in recent years a lot of focus on sports in the Gulf countries and in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and also Qatar with the World Cup, trying to attract both investments and also international attention. I think it is crucial that we do not let this go without a comment from the human rights community and also from the general public. The World Cup in Qatar became a very mediatized discussion about human rights, and especially in the European Parliament, where we saw that it became part of a large corruption scandal here in the Parliament. If we look at the big sporting associations and organizations, the International Olympic Committee, FIFA, then we see that there is not a lot of accountability on the choices that they're making. There is not a lot of transparency about which choices have been made, which is opening up for a lot of corruption taking place. And if you have not a very good record for example, human rights, and you want to cover it up with a sporting event, but you do have a lot of money, then going into corrupt organizations and basically paying your way forward into getting big international sporting events is a very useful way of trying to sports wash your image. For me, it is essential that we make sure that we involve local human rights activists and human rights organizations, because some of the criticism that has been, that the critique of, for example, the World Cup in Qatar was met with, was that it is the Western European-centric view on human rights and trying to impose their values, and is a kind of a jealousy of the success of the Gulf Arab countries that the criticism is based in. And for me, it is essential that human rights are universal, and therefore it is not a European imposed idea on the rest of the world, but it is something that every individual strives for all over the world, to be able to think freely, to speak freely, to decide over their own lives freely. And so we need to make sure that this is not just a battle for the freedom that is seen to be led from from outside of the Gulf states and Bahrain, but that this is something that we are doing together. There is nothing wrong in wanting to host big sporting events, but there is something wrong if you are doing it in order to hide your failings on other issues. We also see that, for example, Saudi Arabia is sponsoring, for example, women's football team in Spain, and is therefore trying to promote themselves as being a feminist ideal, which is so ironic that it's tragic. And that we have football clubs that are accepting sponsors that have, such as Saudi Arabian governmental organizations and companies, without thinking about how that actually tarnishes their own sports clubs. So we need to make sure that we have more transparency and less corruption in international sporting organizations. We should, from all countries, make sure that this is something that we require. And we need to also support our sporting teams in their protests. The Danish national football team was playing in Qatar, and they were very strong on human rights before they went there, but then they sort of backslided once they were there and were not courageous enough to actually speak up. We've seen big Formula One races also being expanded to the Gulf countries and also in Bahrain. And this is also part of the whitewashing campaign. So it's not just football. We also saw that there was an international parliamentarian assembly that was hosted by Bahrain, where I also think there was a lack of consciousness and also debate about the fact that this was being hosted in Bahrain. That is not a functioning democracy with full human rights for all members of the political spectrum, and that has political prisoners as Mr. Al-Khawaja and others in prison for now up to a second decade. And I think it is a responsibility also for the politicians attending there, not only to take pictures of themselves on Formula One racetracks, but also to highlight the fact that of the problems in the country that they're going to. It's important to have dialogue, but we need to have transparent and fair dialogue where we continue to highlight the problematic issues and continue to speak up for the political prisoners in these countries. Another issue with our media landscape today is the influence of influencers, where we have a lot of, for example, bloggers being invited to come and live in, for example, Dubai, and are being given contracts and support, financial support by the governments in order to come and live and share pictures of shopping and nice food and nice clothes, enjoying their life there in a way that is not possible for other immigrants in the country, workers there, and also having signed up to say that they will not criticize the government there. And I think we should not allow bloggers, influencers, TV, reality stars to go there without even considering the impact that they have and the promotion of these countries as a holiday destination without having demands on more democratic responsibility and also full human rights for all in the country, and not just for the bloggers that are taking there, that are going there to live. I think we need to have a international conversation about where we give our attention to, where our international events are held, so that we are not allowing repressive regimes to use these international events to promote themselves as something that they are not. Saudi Arabia is green and wonderful in certain places, but having advertisement in all airports and online about the tourism of Saudi Arabia should be met with healthy criticism from the rest of us. And I think it is important to keep engaging with human rights organizations, such as the center hosting the event today, and also that we as politicians maintain the focus on the human rights abuses taking place in these countries, both in our communication, but also in our parliamentary work. There is quite a big backlash against this in the European Parliament, especially from the far right, but also the conservative political group in the Parliament, saying that we shouldn't be focusing on human rights abuses in third countries. And I think that it is important to stand up for the focus on human rights all over the world. And this is part of our work in the European Parliament. Thank you for allowing me to sort of be the first speaker, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the panel and the questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Melchior, for your insightful intervention. Indeed, to address the issue of sports and other cultural events whitewashing, the EU, its member states, and the private sector must act with respect to human rights due diligence requirements and adequate legislation. For example, in the fight for the release of Danish Bahraini human rights defender Abdulhadi Al-Khawaja, ECDHR has recently addressed the problem of a Danish company named DSVAS Global Transport and Logistics, sponsoring the Bahrain International Circuit, which hosted the Bahrain Formula One Grand Prix, without securing human rights due diligence for private companies. Denmark indirectly facilitates the continued imprisonment of an innocent Danish citizen. Human rights abuses also are constantly dismissed by Western powers, some of which sell arms and foster relations with these countries. Indeed, Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, was returned to the international stage in a position of power, is welcomed by European leaders in the midst of European energy crisis. This is even more problematic since France continues to sell weapons to the kingdom that are used in the Yemen war. Those relations lead to the persistence of human rights violations. And moving forward with the subjects, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Elias Geoffroy, head of MENA region at ACAT France, an NGO that fights against extrajudicial killings, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and helps victims of torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatments. The floor is yours, Mr. Alice.
Well, thank you, Cindy and Daniel. Thank you again for inviting me to this panel. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in it. And I would like, as you mentioned, focus my intervention on how France is playing an active role in its consequence on human rights. And in my speech, actually, to make sure that I stay within the time limit, I'll mostly focus on Saudi Arabia. And just briefly say a few words on Bahrain. I don't have much knowledge yet on the overall situation with on how France has involved itself, but what we can say already is that Bahrain has targeted France as a whitewashing country to be used, especially in sports. So I guess you're familiar with the Tour de France, which has a Bahraini state-sponsored team, which is quite present actually, with quite a big names within its teams. And also more recently, the regime, the kingdom has also spent a lot of money to buy and use as a advertisement tool football club in Paris City. It's not the Paris Saint-Germain, which is already owned by the Qatari, but that's another one, the second one, which is still in the second league, but which might come to the first league at some point. And so they use it as well as a whitewashing strategy, obviously. That's all I'm gonna say on Bahrain for the time being, because I have more, I think, relevant analysis on Saudi Arabia and how France has involved itself with this country. And I think we can already say that by shaking hands and meeting with the MBS during a diplomatic tour in the Gulf in December 2021, Emmanuel Macron was the first European and Western leader to break the unofficial diplomatic ban implemented against Mohammed bin Salman, and by the international community, obviously, following the assassination of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in October 2018. At that time, Macron defended himself by saying that it was necessary to talk to Saudi Arabia, the largest country in the Gulf, to work for the stability of the region. But as he said, that doesn't mean that we are complacent with this. But actually, the truth is that France's government has not been the most vocal on denouncing Khashoggi's assassination and, in general, the human rights situation in the kingdom, not mentioning, obviously, the war in Yemen, where Saudi Arabia was deeply involved. I mean, apparently we might have some truth at the moment, but Saudi Arabia was deeply involved, and France, with French support, as you mentioned, with the arms sales. Macron waited more than 2 months to take position on the dreadful event and to impose sanctions on the members of the Saudi kill teams that targeted Khashoggi. He even said that Germany's decision to suspend arms transfer to Saudi following Khashoggi's murder was pure demagogy, which is quite a strong word. And he probably said that because he knew that this decision would complicate France's own arms exportation to Saudi Arabia, as many components of French manufactured military equipment are produced in Germany as well. The other truth is that France was already deeply engaged with Saudi Arabia on several major projects launched under France's previous president, François Hollande, especially in 2015. This coincides with the arrival of Salman bin Abdelaziz Al Saud as a new king, and with him the rise into power, obviously, of his son, Mohammed bin Salman. And at that time, the United States was also trying to improve its own relation with Iran, while France was maintaining a firm position on Iran, which very pleased Saudi Arabia, especially after launching its wars on Yemen. And this relation will deepen under Macron in 2017 and 2018. And just before, in 2016, Saudi Arabia released its strategic framework, Saudi Vision 2030, which is aiming at reducing the country's dependence on its oil revenue by diversifying its economy. And France has decided to play an important role in it. One point of this strategy is the importance the entertainment sector is supposed to take. And this is one aspect of France on which France has positioned itself quite strongly. And you can say that this pillar is also a massive whitewashing strategy of the regime, of which the French government is very aware and willing to serve this purpose. In 2018, for example, France signed an important agreement with the Saudi government to support the touristic and cultural development of Al Aula region. And this is a 10-long-year agreement contract. And it has a dedicated office that is set up, Afalula, that is the name, and the tag name is the French Office for the Development of Al Aula, sorry. And this office oversees the project implementation on this touristic region. And Saudi Arabia obviously has used its potential touristic attractiveness to display itself as a country open to the world, allowing tourist visa for the first time and sponsoring many foreign influencers to visit and share the trips on social network. It's true that the Emirates are ahead on this, but Saudi Arabia is using also this strategy very much. But this was an obvious counter narrative to the human rights situation that tends to make the headlines in Western media usually. And with this touristic and cultural partnership, French companies are getting many contracts with a total amount that exceed the value of French arms exportation to Saudi Arabia, which is not a small amount. And in a nutshell, we can say that France is the key actor in revamping Saudi Arabia as a new high-end touristic international Eldorado. And there's another aspect to this whitewashing strategy, and this is the entertainment strategy, which is precisely the sport washing. In 2020, you may know that the Rally Dakar motor race managed by the French Armory Sport Organization sets foot on Saudi soil. And it is one of the first major sport events to be hosted in Saudi Arabia since. And this event is particularly interesting, I think, for the Saudi regime, because it will flood French TV and other international television with the beautiful landscape pictures. I mean, actually, the race routes also take the participant to all the different Vision 2030 sites, like Al Aula, the Red Sea Project, Neom, and so on. And in this regard, the race is really like an advertisement for the whole country. But this is also serving as many ways a big advertisement to visit Saudi Arabia, perfectly serving its touristic whitewashing purpose. But this will not might not be the last big sport event that is supported by the French government. If you were dissatisfied by the selection of Qatar for the Football World Cup because of Qatar human rights records, you are going to love the Saudi Arabia bid for the 2030 World Cup, which will team up with Greece and Egypt. And that's quite funny actually, because usually FIFA does not allow for a bid from Asia country, because Qatar was already holding the World Cup like the last year, but they team up with African conference and the European conference countries, so it can still bid for the 2030 World Cup, which obviously comes conveniently with the 2030 vision. And this bid is actually supported by French lobbyist Maurice Gourdeau-Montagne, who's also in charge of the lobbying for the Saudi bid to the 2030 Universal Exhibition. And he is one of the many French lobbyists and lobbying and communication companies working for the Saudi regime, which include, for example, Publicis, Avast, Image7, Still & Holt, and they're all serving Saudi Arabia whitewashing strategy in multiple fields. And there's one lobbyist particularly active that I want to mention because he's very active, as I'm saying, especially in the business sector. That is Richard Attias, who chairs the Future Investment Initiative Institute, which is in charge of the Davos in the Desert since 2017. And this is an organization that is directly funded by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. And also it serves as a business vitrine to the Vision 2030. So most of these lobbying and communication companies have deep relations with the French political elites. Many have served as political advisor to the French authorities. Some are now working within the French presidential cabinet. Others were also a communication advisor to the former Prime Minister of France. And they were before that working in these lobbying companies, especially on Saudi Arabia. And some of the previous advisors are now working in those companies. So there's like revolving doors between those lobbying companies and the French executive members or advisors. And this is just a glimpse of the main activities provided by the French authorities and companies to support the whitewashing strategy implemented by Saudi Arabia. And we already know the result, actually. We see how executions have skyrocketing again following MBS normalization in 2021, which was initiated and supported in many ways by the French authorities. So that was, I hope this brings some light on the role of France on the Saudi Arabia strategy in whitewashing its own crime. And unfortunately, Saudi Arabia is not the only country that is benefiting from this kind of complicity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Geoffroy, for your insights. Indeed, the strategies adopted by these countries are only one side of the coin of whitewashing, the other being constituted by the compliance, as you said, or the powerlessness, or the divisions of the recipients of the whitewashing strategies, that is us. So GCC countries' ability to exploit their investments abroad to leverage political support from the EU have been facilitated by the lack of a common European policy towards the region. For instance, in 2017, when the German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel condemned Saudi adventurism in the Middle East and called for an embargo on arms exports to the country, Riyadh responded by withdrawing its ambassadors from Berlin and preventing major companies in Germany from bidding for government's contracts. German exports to Saudi Arabia then subsequently fell by 5%. And that's why industry representatives in Germany tried to lobby Gabriel's successor, Mr. Heiko Maas, to resolve the dispute, which he did in 2018 when Berlin approved 4 artillery positioning systems to Saudi Arabia. But however, the point is that in its calls on GCC countries, Germany received no support from fellow EU member states, exposing it to the aforementioned political and economic retributions. So no European country can really increase its geopolitical power relative to the GCC by acting by itself alone. The threats of sanctions and trade embargoes can cut both ways. So there is really a need of more shared approach to the whole region at the European level. And we were hoping to receive Mr. Khalid from the Gulf Center for Human Rights, but we are not being able to contact him right now. So I think we are gonna move to our first panelist, Mr. Ali.
I just wanted to also take this opportunity to shed light on political prisoners arbitrarily arrested by GCC governments, hidden by their dismissive whitewashing attitude. Indeed, many Bahraini prisoners, namely Mr. Abdullahi Al-Kawaja, but also Dr. Al-Singais and Mr. Hassan Mushaima, 3 Bahraini human rights defenders, are subjected to inhuman conditions amounting to torture and degrading treatment, as well as unfair trials. The abuses faced by those detained political activists reflect the long-standing and systematic pattern of abuse in Bahraini authorities' approach to political dissidents and the exercise of freedom of expression, assembly, and association. So without further ado, I want to introduce our last panelist, Mr. Ali Mushaima, former Bahraini political prisoner, also son of one of the most important Bahraini political opponents, Mr. Hassan Mushaima. Ali is fighting for the release of his father and for political reforms in Bahrain. In the face of a mediatic campaign, shaping Bahrain as a modern country, Ali has direct experiences with the human rights violations happening in Bahrain. So the floor is yours, Mr. Mushaima.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the European Center for Democracy and Human Rights for organizing this important seminar and providing me with the opportunity to participate. Whitewashing human rights violations is one of the most prominent methods used by repressive Gulf countries to cover up their atrocious violations. My discussion is about Bahrain and the role it plays in this regard, which I see from another perspective as evidence not only of existence of violations, but also of the magnitude of corruption in the country. In Bahrain, Al Khalifa family holds absolute control over the sports sector. Crown Prince Salman enjoys car racing, so he built the Formula One circuit to enjoy the game, and no one can hold him accountable for the economic consequences behind it. Prince Nasser bin Hamad also presents himself as a superhero in all sports, claiming to be the first in equestrian endurance races and cycling, and he uses the country's resources to pursue his personal hobbies, while no one can question him about anything. Listen to the sum of title of Nasser bin Hamad: representative of the king for charitable work, national security advisor, commander of the royal guard, major general in the army, chairman of the Supreme Council for Youth and Sports, chairman of the board and directors of the oil and gas holding company, president of Bahrain equestrian team, endurance team, cycling team, and also a poet, apparently. Just a month ago, it was announced that the prize money for the King Hamad competitions was increased. And the next day, it was announced that Nasser bin Hamad had won it, followed by a celebration at the King's Palace for his victory, not to mention the lavish expenditures of competitions and matches held in his name. His other brother, Khalid bin Hamad, did not have much left, so he came up with the idea of swimming. In order for him to become a superhero like his brother, they organized a swimming marathon that Khalid alone completed. The media reported that he swam a distance of 45 kilometers. And his brother Nasser claimed he even slept while swimming. In a regard display, his father, the king, received and honored him after he finished swimming the 45 kilometers. And there are many other funny yet ridiculous examples, but there is no space to list them all here. However, what I want to say from all of this is that, is that the country's resources are being used for amusement of the royal family. The important thing is for them to pursue their hobbies, enjoy their time, and to present themselves as extraordinary individuals. It is absurd. Returning to the issue of using sports whitewash violations, the problem is not only with the Al Khalifa regime that promotes it, but also with the countries and the sports organizations that provide them with what they want, knowing fully well that their record of human rights violations is atrocious. The use of sports to whitewash violations is a dual or joint policy between repressive regimes and some global sports organizations, such as Formula One, which seeks to increase its profits and is not overly concerned with the human rights record, human rights. Some sports are also used to network and strengthen diplomatic relations, as well as to serve propaganda purposes. The occasion of a grand sports event prompts the rulers of Bahrain to invite presidents and officials to visit the country to observe the spectacle. In so doing, governments that attend or officials like from British House of Commons, for example, and officials from British government turn a blind eye to the deteriorating human rights situation in Bahrain. What is even worse, and what many may not know, is that a number of sports that are being used for political purposes are essentially owned by these Gulf rulers. For example, the British company McLaren, which includes a number of sports, including Formula One, is 59% owned by the Bahraini Sovereign Wealth Fund. So Bahrain had previously injected 367 million during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 to prevent the company's bankruptcy. McLaren Group is headed by Mohammed bin Isa Al Khalifa, and thus they already have control over the management of these sports and then use them for political purposes. Secondly, they run these projects from a commercial investments perspective, but the result are contrary to those goals, as they often lose money on their investments. The problem is that no one can hold them accountable internally, whether it be from parliament, oppositions, or others, because the Al Khalifa family acts as if everything belongs to them. Thirdly, the Al Khalifa family monopolized power and wealth in Bahrain in hosting any sports event, which is an individual decision of the ruling family, not based on objective economic studies. These are decisions made to satisfy their desires and to whitewash their violations. Human rights violations in Bahrain will not stop as long as the current regime is a dictatorial one. Even if the regime were forced to release all prisoners today, there is no guarantee that they would not be arbitrarily arrested again unless there is a system of accountability, monitoring, and genuine legislation. Otherwise, the violations and manipulation of the country's resources will continue. This is a clear reality and a just demand put forth by the people of Bahrain, who will not surrender until freedom prevails and dignity is restored. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali, for your intervention. We also want to thank our previous panelists for all their inputs. Before moving to the Q&A session, I'd like to say a few words on a different unaccounted form of whitewashing, which is instead, however, shared by all these countries we mentioned, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. It involves the shaping of the public opinion through the control and manipulation of the so-called online informational landscape, which is limiting, blocking, and filtering access to opposition-leaning online contents, using pro-government trolls, automated social media accounts, and bots to do hashtag poisoning, employing permanent staff, or even, like in Saudi Arabia's case, whole marketing firm to spread disinformation and government propaganda, or just as Ms. Melchior said before, using influencers on social media to raise more online contents related to the interests of the government, All of these can create the illusion of popular support for the government policies, both at home and abroad, ensuring that pro-government messages, ideas, narratives dominate social media trend lists, and in this way effectively disrupt criticism or other forms or other unwanted conversations. So this is a form of whitewashing that deploys a whole, let's say, technological system and the digital policy adopted in these countries. And it's often forgotten how these practices can contribute to the whitewashing of human rights. So as we believe we have received, we already received some questions. Yeah, we want to move to the Q&A session. Anyone can raise questions through the opposite Q&A chat. If you want your questions to be answered by a specific panelist, please make sure to specify it in the message.
Okay, so the first question, how could we prevent private companies in Europe from supporting whitewashing strategies through their trade partnerships or investments?
Well, to provide an input, I think the problem with private companies is that they are private. The first immediate issue. So as long as member states don't have specific rules binding their private companies to, to comply with human rights due diligences, it's going to be hard. But I don't know if our panelists have major inputs. Yes, please, Ms. Macchioli.
Well, first of all, we as consumers need to be aware of what our companies are doing, but also we will be voting on a due diligence regulation tomorrow, actually, in the European Parliament Committee on Legal Affairs, where there will also be due diligence obligations on human rights. And so if a private company is providing support for human rights violations by states, by sponsoring, then I think we should at least look into whether this can be against the regulation of due diligence that will be adopted soon.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, for example, our case with the DSGO, the Danish company, was like our efforts were pointing to push the Danish government, but also the Danish Institute for Human Rights to pressure either the company itself or the parliamentarians to push for major human rights due diligence measures. However, it's indeed not so straightforward when it comes to private companies understand the limits of human rights due diligence regulations, like where do they end, what is legitimate, just legitimate economic trade partnerships, or when these partnerships actually help whitewashing. We another question for Ms. Melchior. Would you endorse the application of targeted sanctions under the EU global sanctions regime to officials of GCC countries responsible for perpetrating significant human rights violation as a way to hold these officials accountable?
Yes, we have EU legislation allowing for individual sanctions against people who are perpetrating human rights violations. And I think that we should hold the individuals accountable that are actually deciding and implementing the human rights violations, both in the GCC countries, but across the world. The European Union is not very good at actually using these so-called Maginski laws. Canada and the US are quite more effective of this. I think in part it might be because we need to have all member states agreeing to apply these sanctions. And unfortunately, the countries that are doing human rights violations are quite good at trying to incentivize countries with contracts or economic interests to refrain from applying sanctions. And we need to have a higher standard and enforcing our human rights sanctions against the perpetrators much better from the European Union.
Yeah, indeed, this is also linked to what I was talking about before when I talked about the Germany case. Sometimes we have European member states really focusing on their long-term strategic partnerships rather than on human rights, and these, whereas others actually, care and fight for them. But this alignment, this difference, creates the opportunity for these countries to just keep on going with their relations without receiving strong common response from the EU. I don't know what are your inputs about this, Mr. Geoffroy or Ali, if you have any.
Well, I mean, on the EU level, I have less knowledge. I think Karen covered it already. But one thing that can be done is that at the national level is for the civil society to organize itself to build campaigns to pressure these different business organizations regarding the investment in these countries. But that is a lot of work to be done. But I think the civil society has a major role in playing on this issue. And sometimes especially in France, as you presented in my presentation, we can't wait much any good initiative for the moment from the government in whatever the government it is, because usually the consulting organization, the field, the executive cabinet, whatever the political side they're coming from. So it's not necessarily focused about the current president, but also, as I said, this started with the previous president, and this will probably go on with another president from another party. And so there's it's more like the political elite system that is a bit problematic at the moment, because there's this deep connections with this influence business organization. And so this is another point where the civil society should also try to push for more transparency. We have some rules usually that oblige those different civil servants to publicly and transparently present what they've been working on before and so on. But there's a lack of enforcement and binding rules to exclude this kind of revolving doors that is a bit too easy to be done at the moment in France. I mean, when someone has been working for the benefit of another government, and that this person is coming in to advise the French political executive or parliamentary office, well, we should have some limits to that, obviously, because otherwise you end up with this supporting strategy to the Saudi regime, for example. So yeah, the civil society, I think this is one thing they can definitely try to do, but it's difficult because well, we don't have the same capacity, and sometimes you need to make yourself heard within the media landscape, which is not always easy to be done, because also it's owned by big companies that are sometimes also involved in those countries. So yeah, it's quite a challenging issue, but I think we can't wait too much from the state to be moving forward on this. We need to push him a bit at least.
Yeah, indeed, it should be like a collaboration between civil society and political actors. And since we are on topic, we can skip this one if you want to read it.
So we have a question. How do we go about sanctioning the torture officials from Bahrain?
And also, how do we start the process how much would MEPs like to support such a move? Thank you, Dr. Said, for the questions. I mean, I want to say that partially this was answered by Ms. Melchior. Indeed, the process requires all member states to agree on this. And yeah, probably also thanks to the efforts from the civil society, maybe there is a chance of coordinating, so to say, member states' interests in certain instances. But as Mr. Geoffroy said, it's definitely not so an easy procedure. Then about how much would MEPs like to support such a move to sanction torture officials from Bahrain? I cannot answer this question, definitely. I think it depends on the political groups, on the
Yeah, I think, I mean, it depends on the political points of view of the individual MEPs, but I think our resolution on the political prisoners in Bahrain in December last year was agreed with a majority of the parliament. The EPP, the Conservative group, was boycotting the human rights urgency resolutions at the time, but even with the EPP group participating, I still think that there would be a majority for this. On foreign policy issues, we need the member states, the Council of Ministers, to join in. So here it's unfortunately not just a question of the European Parliament coming together on this.
Can I ask Karim?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. As an MEP, can you know there is a annual dialogue between EEAS and Bahrain for human rights, what they say for human rights. I think the Bahrain is benefit from this annual dialogue because they just like feel they are welcome in Europe and they have a good and strong relations, and they already discuss about the human rights issue, and they receive some like welcome and a greeting from different countries. I asked EEAS sometimes if can they like at least put like conditions for this annual dialogue. Otherwise, there is no meaning for this dialogue. As MEP, can you like put pressure for at least putting conditions or stop this annual dialogue unless there is real progress?
We have a Foreign Affairs Committee in the European Parliament. We also have a delegation on the GCC countries. The MEPs in these two forums in the Parliament can call the Commission in for meetings and ask them about the state of affairs on this dialogue. I think I'm not quite sure how many countries we have dialogue with, if there are countries that we stop having dialogues with when the human rights situation is sufficiently bad. But I think I'm not sure if the Bahrain, even though the situation is very problematic, is bad enough to stop the dialogue. I think it is important that we make sure that there is that it cannot be used as a sort of whitewashing of the human rights record of Bahrain, which from your question, it feels a little bit like the Bahraini government is doing. So we need to make sure that the criticism is being made loud and clear. And we can, of course, ask questions to the European External Action Service, the EEAS, about what the criteria would be for stopping the human rights dialogue with Bahrain.
Okay, can I extend my question? Sorry. Now, as you MEP from European Parliament, or as you Danish, your government as well. So I saw, I mean, you support Abdelhadi Al-Khwaja case and you demand in different, I mean, time for his immediate release and conditional release. But now in 12 years, you, sorry to say that, I don't, you fail even to secure or make sure that he can access for medical treatment. So this is a basic rights for your citizens. So what can you do then? If you cannot, I mean, fight to release your citizens, and you cannot even make sure that he can access for basic rights, which is medical treatment, what can you do?
As a European parliamentarian, I can only continue to call on the member states, call on the Danish government, the embassy of Denmark appointed to Bahrain, to visit him and have other political prisoners to make sure that they get the medical attention that they need. But it is up to the member states to apply the necessary pressure and demands to the Bahraini government. And we can keep asking the member states to do this. And we can keep highlighting the issues when we look at trade agreements or other forms of cooperation with the Bahraini government.
Last thing, sorry, very little. I think my suggestion is to try from another way, not to put pressure on Bahrain direct, try to put pressure on British government. This is my suggestion, because what I see, what I know, that Bahrain is supported by the British government. They support them with technical assistance. They advise them, they greeting them. So I think it's better to try from with British government rather than talk or call the Bahraini government. This is just my suggestion. And thank you very much. And sorry for my many questions.
No, they're good questions. And I share your frustration in not being able to having achieved more tangible results. The UK is not a member state anymore, but I think it would be good to apply pressure to the member states whenever we have interactions with them. And then also to ask our colleagues in the national parliaments to apply pressure to their governments.
No, indeed. Thank you both for the very interesting conversation you had. I think just to wrap it up, the whole international relations between the different states are very much complicated. I don't think that interrupting dialogues would be a good strategy. I mean, if you interrupt dialogue, there is literally no way of addressing the issues in a direct manner. It would be only aggressively indirect. And also, it's a multi-sided effort. You cannot just pressure the UK because he partnered up with Bahrain. It's a multi-sided pressure. When it harmonizes, it might bring positive results. Anyway, I have to apologize with all the participants and spectators that posed your questions, because we don't have much time to pose them all. Maybe Cindy, we can select one. Maybe this one. Yeah. So a question from Anonymous: the renewed friendship between France and Saudi Arabia can only facilitate whitewashing. How can the EU ensure member states how can we ensure EU member states conditionalize their relations with GCC countries on human rights benchmarks, safeguards, and due diligence? Well, again, I mean, individual member states' relations with GCC countries are often a matter of national policy, and I mean, this is the main reason why it's hard to coordinate actions among the different member states, I think. But if our panelists, maybe Mr. Geoffroy, who talked about the topic, wants to try to give a bigger answer.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer this, because it's more like how the EU can ensure that the member states conditionalize their relation on several topics. I mean, I'm more of an expert, if I can say so, on the national level, and I think I already said a bit how the civil society could play on this side, and also it depends also if you manage to implement, I mean, to build new legal framework that kind of restrict this or restrain the possibility to engage with such countries. But usually this kind of legal obligation comes from the EU level, less from the national level. But then the issue for us, even if we have a EU level regulation, is to make sure that it is implemented nationally in France, because sometimes we have like judicial difficulties to make sure that the tribunals and the judicial in general oblige the government to respect it. I mean, if it's like an individual person or even a representative from a civil society member, they cannot force, sometimes depending on the specific legal setting, to force the enforcement of this regulation. Sometimes, like we've seen that on a different level on the arms treaty, for example, which has been very difficult to make sure that this treaty is actually respected by the French authorities. And there's also EU position on this, and both legal texts have been difficult to be implemented because there was some kind of legal theories restriction that prevent from its proper implementation. And so my fear is that even if we have something that's come from the EU level, it might be not that easy to have it implemented correctly in France, for example. I cannot talk about the other countries, but I'm in France. Well, it has been an issue on the Arms Trade Treaty, for example, which can be an example.
Yeah, thank you very much for this answer. And if we have time for maybe one last question, if the panelists are okay with it.
One last question, and then I definitely need to leave.
No, we completely understand. Indeed, it's a question for you, Ms. Melchior. Do you think visa liberalization agreements can be used as leverages by EU decision makers to pressure these countries to actually implement their acclaimed reforms to address human rights violations? So visa.
I think it can be part of the pressure for these countries. But I think that other countries with bigger economic importance for the countries, such as access to European airspace, in the question of Qatar, where you had both the access to the European airspace and then also visa liberalization, that was caught up in this corruption scandal from December, that was discovered in December. I think, unfortunately, the people responsible for the human rights abuses, they will have ways to get around getting their visas that they need to go.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, sorry for this technical issue. The PC turned off. Anyway, we want to thank you for your participation, for your insights. It was very inspiring for me, at least. We hope this event will be just one of the many others, because the importance of raising awareness and being able to recognize these mechanisms of sportswashing and whitewashing is indeed the first step to actually counteract them. So thank you again, Mr. Melchior, Mr. Geoffroy, Mr. Ali, for your interventions. We want to thank all the participants NGO representatives and parliamentarians from EU member states and their assistants. We wish you a very nice day.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice
you,
day
Karim.
too.
Thank you,
Have
Alice.
a nice day.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Ali.
everyone. See
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.